Results, communication, and the external impact. Just in the recent past, we have seen quite a number of examples where people just made one statement and suddenly the impact on the whole organization was severe. And we need to put it in the spotlight and talk about why did that happen and how can you prevent that from happening. But first, we need to talk about why did it happen? What happened in the recent past? I'm going to give you a couple of examples from different industries. Then we look at the problem, and one thing which came to me via email, people asked me, could I give some specific examples when it comes to how do I help my own organization to become better? Could you give me specific examples? Yes, I will give you some examples of what we did in the past and what we could do for you. But of course, we are focusing on the real world examples, the problems, and then how to do it better. So let's start with the real world examples. So, Philipp Lahm, former World Cup winner as the captain of the German football, for our American listeners, soccer national football team from Germany, wrote his memoirs, his book, his rules of the game, and the book was published and it immediately made headlines. Unfortunately, not the way Philipp Lahm hoped it will make the news. It made the news because in his book, Philipp Lahm tells homosexual football players not to come out. He says there's too much controversy out there. There are people discriminating you. So and these are his words, it only might work in a couple of clubs. But he recommends that, of course, no football player should come out before they retire. A pathetic and horrible statement from a former national team's captain. But when we look into the world of football, it gets even worse. But I will also give you a good example of how to do it properly. But we have a couple of examples before where it didn't go too well. Hansi Flick, the manager of FC Bayern Munich, criticized Mr. Lauterbach, the nationwide expert for the global pandemic we're all facing, and was loudly calling for an end of the lockdown. And he said that all the politicians only talk about the pandemic for their own personal profit, because in Germany we're going to have an election year at the end of 2021. Well, so far only Bayern Munich made a profit out of what happened in the recent past, because it was Bayern Munich and they flew to Dubai for the Club World Championship, a competition which is reasonably unknown. They were very angry about that. They had to stay 9 hours inside a plane at the airport. Well, they just didn't mention that it was a first-class plane, so it must be really horrible. We all know these horrible nights in first-class planes, don't we? And Mr. Flick, the manager of FC Bayern Munich, also said, we need to see a light in the tunnel. Well, that's a new one for me. I thought we should see a light at the end of the tunnel, but having light inside the tunnel, of course, makes sense in one way or the other, or maybe it doesn't. So he criticizes the government for helping people to get through this pandemic with the least amount of people dying and hospitals not being overrun by COVID patients. And he does that. He criticizes the government based on he wants more football games to happen, more football matches to happen. And we had horrible examples from FIFA and the UEFA just in the last weeks. Just to give you an example, the game of the German team, Leipzig versus Liverpool, happened in Budapest. So it now seems to be the rule that we just fly the football teams where the corona rules on that day just fit the bill, and then we do the match there. Maybe you think this just happened once. No, it didn't. So, for example, when we look at the German team Hoffenheim against the Norwegian team Molde FK, played in Valencia. Makes total sense. You just fly from Germany to Spain, then from Norway to Spain. So a German and Norwegian team play in Spain. When you think this is pointless, well, some people talk common sense, because now some people might, of course, think, oh, come on, Niels, just stop doing these football examples because footballers aren't very smart. So first, this is not true. Second, professional football became very complicated when it comes to tactics, so you have to be reasonably smart to understand the game and win it. And third, some people in football made a reasonable statement. So, for example, Jürgen Klopp, the manager from Liverpool, was the one, when he was questioned what he thinks about the COVID-19 lockdown rules. He said that he is very surprised why journalists are going to ask football managers. According to Jürgen Klopp, football managers have no expertise, they shouldn't have any say about the lockdown, and that is a brilliant statement. Jürgen Klopp by himself says, I'm just a manager with a cap and a bad shave. That's what he said about himself. So when you don't have an expertise in a certain area, listen to the expert and don't pretend that you're an expert based on what you think or based on what you Google just for 5 minutes. Of course, there were some people who took a profit out of what happened and what the FC Bayern Munich and Mr. Philipp Lahm did wrong. St. Pauli, which is another football club in northern Germany, they said that they will still be the home for loving people of all color and from all different nations. So you see, when you do it wrong, there will always be someone who takes advantage of you. And by the way, when we now go into another industry, for example, IT, in this case gaming, there is a game which is called Splatoon. You don't have to know the game, it's not relevant for that. And Splatoon now dropped that you can choose a gender for your character. There are only styles, which means you can design how your character looks like, but there is no more male and female choice. Nintendo simply dropped that. They walked away from the binary gender model. And isn't it very surprising that suddenly all these so conservative, traditional, value-driven people who say, this is not really for me, the whole gender discussion and the gender identity thing, they stayed very silent as soon as they realized, oh, we can make money from that? That sounds good to me. How very surprising. And it went even worse last week. It was the Yale professor Jason Stanley who published a study which was cited in the London Economics. So I'm talking about prestigious and worldwide known universities with leading professors and leading magazines publishing citations from these studies, that the fight against woke culture, because that was what the article was about. If you don't know what woke culture is, and by the way, when you are in a leadership position, you actually already should know, but I have no problem explaining it to you. It briefly said, woke culture means a culture where they have a strong focus on social and racial justice and the issues happening in these areas. So the fight against woke culture led by the Tories, that's the Conservative Party in the UK, is now scientifically proven connected to fascism. Congratulations for Boris Johnson to make that happen. So, and by the way, just to tell you about my own bias, I am politically conservative. I am an entrepreneur. I am self-employed. I am in for low taxation and less regulation. So you find me in Germany with the liberals. By the way, there is a difference, because I received a couple of very sad emails. There is a difference between liberals and libertarians. Please Google, that's the first thing you should do to get a tiny bit of clue. Please Google liberalism and then libertarianism. There is a difference, and I am liberal. I am not libertarian. So the Tories now are officially connected with their fight against woke culture, connected to fascism. Congratulations, another communication masterpiece. And when we look into the US, we have Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, who during the time when people in Texas had no power, which means there was a massive power failure, people had no access either to clean water because all the cleaning and sewage plants didn't work. They didn't even have access to heating. They didn't even have access to any kind of power. So a horrible time, of course, in winter in Texas. When you ever have seen a winter in Texas, it is very, very cold. So Ted Cruz simply flew to Cancun, Mexico. I mean, that is one way how to escape the situation. And of course, when you are in a leadership position, people will love when you as someone in charge will then not be able to deal with it because you flew on a vacation. And instead of admitting the wrongdoing, he then said, oh, he only wanted to fly to Cancun due to his two daughters. They wanted to go there. I think they're like 10 and 12 years old. So he used his children as a shield to protect himself. Of course, no one believed that, especially as pictures were taken of him on the way to the airport, at the gate in the airport, having a suitcase which is so large, which clearly indicates it's not a one-day trip. So he came back one day later, and instead of saying, sorry, I was wrong, he simply pretended that he only did it for his daughters. And of course, no one believed him. And of course, you can now always say, with each and every of these issues, you could say, don't we have anything more important to do? Don't we have anything more important to take care of? And by the way, that is usually the question people ask you when they have no reasoning or argument behind their point. But let's just go down that route. Before we look into the problems with that and into how to do it better, let's just go down the route of, don't we have anything better to do? Well, let's just go back 1 week. 14th of February. What did we have 14th of February? Exactly Valentine's Day. And some people, of course, love Valentine's Day, and some people say, oh, it's not relevant to me, I didn't do anything on that day. I am one of these people. Valentine's Day has no tradition in Germany, so I simply didn't pick it up. It's not a relevant day for me. I'm single, not married, so it's even less relevant to me. So when this day happens, you of course could say, isn't there anything more important to take care of? Couldn't we just move on and get back to work? Well, of course there are more important things to do. So for example, 15th of February, we all know that was an important day, wasn't it? Some of you might now become reasonably silent and think, what does he mean with 15th of February? That was a Monday. So what was on February 15th? Well, when you always claim, isn't there something more important to do? You should know about what is more important to do. 15th of February was Childhood Cancer Day. Not important? Or maybe not important to you? Maybe you don't like children, maybe you don't care, and of course you will say you care about children. Of course you will say that cancer is horrible and childhood cancer probably is even worse because children shouldn't have to face, no one should face cancer, but maybe it's even worse for children, you might say. But when you say, isn't there anything more important to do or to think of, and at the same time you have no idea which important things are out there, then you have every right to be criticized, and you will face that criticism. But now we should look into what is the problem with the communication and, of course, the external impact of your communication. So the first aspect of the problem is there's a lack of reflection about your own critical position, and especially when you are in a privileged position, these privileges will be questioned as soon as you did something wrong. I just give you an example. When you make an error in communication and people say your background is you worked your way up in the industry, you didn't really learn what you do, you just try to get along, and then people will be reasonably forgiving until you don't do the same mistake over and over again. When you come from a rich family, from a privileged family, from an elite university, and then you do these mistakes, people will not be forgiving. And that means the more privileged your background is, the more you have to deliver on first try. And that is something which you can learn. And by the way, we all have to reflect on our background. So I can, of course, tell you, I come from northern Germany, very small village. And I could just say the story stops there. Well, of course, that's not the whole story. I come from a very small village, no question about that. Northern Germany is neither rich nor wealthy, especially not during the times when I grew up there. My mother stayed at home, so my parents were married, and they are still married, so I grew up in an intact family. So, by the way, 50% of all children are not growing up in an intact family. And my mother stayed at home, took care of my sister and me. My father worked very long hours, traveled to Hamburg, the next large city, working there as a public prosecutor. And my parents were very keen that my sister and I would both be good at school. So people at home cared about how we do at school and that we succeed at school. And they were successful with doing so. And that is a privilege because 50%, minimum 50% of all the children in the nation, no matter in which country you live, 50% of the children will not have two parents because they split, they divorce, or whatever else happened. And then I'm not even talking about the job background. Do they care about education? Do they push you forward towards education? That is something where people simply have a privilege which you have to reflect upon. And when you see there is a privilege, you must do better in communication. The problem is, when you are in a privileged position, you often are surrounded by other people from similar privileged backgrounds, and that's why you don't see that you need to reflect on it. The second aspect of the problem is that often people deny to change, senior leaders deny to change before it's too late. So I just gave you a couple of examples. Philip Lahm, most recently, when he writes, if he had the chance to write the book again, he would most likely not say again that homosexual soccer players should not come out. He will not say that again. Most likely, after the negative criticism, FC Bayern Munich managers and executives would not make a big fuss out of staying a night in a first class plane. and they probably would not openly publish that they travel to Dubai. They might even rethink to travel to Dubai at all. Maybe the FIFA and UEFA at the end of the pandemic will rethink the approach that we fly football teams around the world only to make matches happen. And Jurgen Klopp will smilingly stand there and tell you, I told you so. And if he doesn't want to say, I told you so, he will say, I informed you thusly. So when you see how bad this can happen and how bad it can end, it was just last week where I had to address that KPMG's chairman, the KPMG chairman had to resign only due to one statement or two statements he made. People should stop moaning about COVID-19, and unconscious bias, in his opinion, is nonsense, or better to say, crap. That's the word he used, not my words. And then he had to resign. And we know how this goes. He, of course, said his position is untenable, and that's why he left. Basically, they will have told him, either you leave on your free will, if not, we will fire you. It's just a matter of fact, what do you want to have in your CV? So when you see how bad it can go, when you see how bad it can end, why do you still think it is okay not to change before the damage happens? And by the way, would you allow any of your employees to refuse to change up to the moment that the damage happens and then the employee changes afterwards? No, you wouldn't allow anyone to do that. So when senior leaders go down the road of I don't change before it goes really bad, then you should not be surprised that people don't take you seriously anymore. And the third aspect of the question is that often when negative consequences happen, so for example, you have a communication failure, you have a massive impact on your brand, so suddenly you have to spend a lot of money on repairing your reputation, and then of course, who should face the consequences? Senior leaders should do, because you caused the problem. But often this is not the case. What happens is they cut the budget of other departments, then suddenly there is no training, there's no coaching anymore available, there's no ongoing education, salaries are changed or adopted, everything has to be purchased a bit cheaper. So basically, senior leadership creates the problem and everyone else has to deal with it. So senior leadership causes the issue and everyone else faces the consequences, while at the same time senior leadership gets away with saying sorry. This is of course not an appropriate approach. And of course, when you now think, how will I be ever able to change that? It is about how you implement it. I just give you a couple of examples in 30 seconds and then we move on to how to make it better. So for example, you can deliver professional training. Professional training, for example, about diversity issues or communication or conflict management or simply sustainable leadership. You can hire professional speakers for your corporate events and bring the impulse, the ideas of these professional speakers into your organization. You can offer coaching to individuals or to groups. Coaching is mostly individuals. You can set up a whole mentoring program where people are accompanied throughout their career to do things right. And of course, in due course of engaging professional project or interim managers, you can be sure that these people help you to get things right. Unfortunately, many people start to act once it's too late. It is way better to do it proactively, because even when things go wrong after such a training happened, you can still say, look, we have done everything possible what we could do. And by the way, if you do these measures and then people find out that you just booked the cheapest trainers and coaches available, then they will tear you apart twice. So don't go down the cheap route, because that never worked. Just look for people who charge the appropriate fees. There are market overviews available. So, and of course, I'm happy to talk to you about that as well. So how can we do it? How can we do it better now? Aspect number one is an aspect I just mentioned. Aspect number one is you need professional training for communication and leadership. And by the way, if you now say, oh, we do it the way we always did it because it went well so far and we made good experiences, that is what Professor Cunning from the University of Osnabrück already said before, the University of Applied Sciences in Osnabrück. He's a leading scientist in Germany and does a lot of research about how to develop the right people. And when we look at him, what he always says is that people always come along with the line, it went well so far. Well, that doesn't mean that it goes on well in the future. But the worst part of the line is, we made good experiences. Well, you're just evaluating your own work. Of course, you will say you made good experiences. You will not say, oh, the last 20 years, I think my work was reasonably bad. No one will say that. So when you comment your own work, you will always say we made good experiences with that. That does not mean that as soon as people look at it from a scientific point of view, it will work at all. The second aspect of how to do better is new generations are coming into your workforce. New generations also will be your future clients. And when you simply do not adopt to the needs of the future generation, then your organization will either die out, because when you want to play the dinosaur, you will go the way of the dinosaur, or when you adapt too slowly, your organization will suffer, which means you either have to downsize or change your whole organization before you can then recover. So for example, when you say woke culture isn't really for us, the majority of younger people are very concerned when people in their circle of friends cannot live their life just due to who they are. So when you think that your approach to a monocultural, we all look the same, dark suit, white shirt, dark tie kind of world, when you think you're just going down that road for the next 20 years, here's the bad news. It will be a rocky road full of failures, and failures where you don't recover well from. So be sure that once you made the transition and you decided that you are actively welcoming people from a younger generation, and also you have to see that the decision makers of the future come from a diverse background, as soon as you see that this happens, you have to change proactively. If you change reactively, you will pay a lot of money to just recover from the damage. And the third aspect of how to do better is you have an own idea of what you consider professional. So when you have an idea of what you consider professional, you expect that you are professional, you expect that others are professional, and you hopefully will have clients who you think act professionally towards you. And now just imagine about the change I just talked about. Let's just imagine you sell a product and the product is available in 500 different colors. And suddenly all your clients say, I only want a red colored product. And of course you could now say, well, but we have a very different approach. Our approach is more traditional. We sell multicolored products. But the client said, we only want red colored products. What would you do? You first will say, we need red colored products and we need it right now. Second, you will tell each and every employee in your organization, this is the change we always talked about. Focus on the client and the customer. Change proactively to meet the customer's need. So when you now see that society changes towards a diverse society where woke culture is a part of it, by the way, does not mean that you will not have conservative people anymore. And by the way, as I told you before, my own bias, I come from a conservative background as a self-employed entrepreneur. So don't think that your personality needs to evaporate. Don't think that you will be silenced, because we know these lines from certain outlets in the media that people are silent and they can't say their opinion loud anymore. That's not correct. The times that people accept open discriminatory words, these times are over. You simply have to change in a way that you must be aware. When you make a public statement, it has a public impact. And that's why you need professional training and professional consultancy and professional skills for communication, for leadership, and for sustainability. Because as soon as your clients would change, you would change as well. And by the way, your clients are already changing. The question is only, are you changing as well? I wish you all the best implementing these principles in your organizations. I'm happy to get into a chat with you. Let's just meet for a, most likely in these times, virtual coffee. You find my email address in the show notes of this podcast. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And for this week, there's only one thing for me left to say. Thank you very much for your time.